smell of wood smoke and pine filled Willa Lawson's nostrils as she slowly opened her eyes to the gray dawn light filtering through the Nevada wilderness. And the first thing she noticed was the terrible, hollow silence where her supplies should have been rustling in the morning breeze. Her heart lurched as she sat up from her bedroll near the dying embers of her campfire, seeing nothing but empty space where her saddlebags, her food stores, her water canteens, and even her spare boots had been carefully arranged the night before. Someone had crept through her camp while she slept and taken everything except the clothes on her back and the thin blanket she had been wrapped in. Panic gripped her chest as she scrambled to her feet, spinning in every direction to search for any sign of her belongings. The year was 1884, and she had been traveling alone from Carson City toward the small mining town of Sloan, carrying supplies and savings to start a new life away from the painful memories of her late father's gambling debts. Now, 3 days into her journey through the unforgiving Nevada desert terrain, she had nothing. No food, no water, no money, and worst of all, no horse. The thieves had taken her mare too, leaving only hoof prints in the dusty earth leading away into the scrub brush and rocky hills. Willa fought back tears as the morning sun began to climb higher, already promising another scorching day. She was 22 years old, alone in the wilderness, and completely stranded. The nearest settlement had to be at least 2 days' walk, maybe more, and without water she would never make it. Her throat already felt dry just thinking about it. She kicked at the dirt in frustration, then immediately regretted wasting the energy. A sound made her freeze. Hoofbeats, coming from the direction of the trail she had been following. Willa's first instinct was to hide, to duck behind the rocks, and wait for whoever was coming to pass by. After all, it could be the thieves returning or worse, but desperation made her bold. She needed help, and this might be her only chance. A lone rider appeared around the bend, sitting tall in the saddle on a sturdy buckskin horse. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun, a faded blue shirt, and leather chaps dusty from travel. As he drew closer, Willa could make out his features, strong jaw shadowed with stubble, weathered tan skin, and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her camp in a single glance. He looked to be in his mid-20s, and something about the careful way he approached, one hand resting easy near his hip but not threatening, told her he was experienced with trouble. "Morning, missus," he said, reining in his horse about 20 feet away. His voice was deep and measured, with a slight drawl. "You look like you have had some bad luck." Willa straightened her spine, trying to maintain some dignity despite her desperate situation. Her dark hair had come loose from its braid and hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. "That is putting it mildly, sir. Thieves took everything I had while I slept. My horse, my supplies, everything." The cowboy dismounted in one smooth motion and walked his horse closer, though he kept a respectful distance. Now that he was on the ground, she could see he stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who spent his life working hard. "Name is Quinn Prescott," he said, touching the brim of his hat politely. "I have been trailing a group of horse thieves for the better part of a week. Sounds like they found you last night." "Willa Lawson," she replied, wrapping her arms around herself despite the growing heat. "How many are there?" "4 that I know of," Quinn said, his eyes scanning the ground around her camp. He crouched down to examine the tracks, his long fingers tracing the outlines in the dust. "Looks like maybe 3 horses came through here. They are getting bolder, hitting camps right under people's noses." He stood up and looked at her directly, and she saw genuine concern in his expression. "Where were you headed?" "Sloan," Willa said. "I have a job waiting there, or at least I hope I still do. I was supposed to arrive by the end of the week." Quinn pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his sandy brown hair, considering. "Sloan is a hard 2-day ride from here, maybe 3 on foot, and that is if you know the trails. In this heat, without water?" He did not need to finish the sentence. They both knew what that meant. I cannot just stay here, Willa said, hating how her voice shook slightly. I have to at least try. No argument there, Quinn agreed. He walked back to his horse and began untying one of his saddlebags. Lucky for you, I have got supplies to spare, and I happen to be headed in the same direction. Had a telegram waiting for me in Carson City about a ranching job down near Sloan. Seems like we can help each other out. Willa blinked in surprise. You would share your supplies with me, just like that? Quinn turned to look at her, and something in his steady gaze made her heart skip unexpectedly. Cannot in good conscience leave a lady stranded in the desert, Miss Lawson. My mama raised me better than that. Besides, 2 sets of eyes are better than 1 when there are thieves about. He pulled out a canteen and handed it to her. Willa took it with trembling hands, suddenly realizing how thirsty she had become from the shock and fear. The water was warm but tasted like heaven. She forced herself to drink slowly, not wanting to seem desperate even though she was. Thank you, she said quietly, handing the canteen back. I do not know how I will repay you. No repayment needed, Quinn said, already rummaging through his supplies. He pulled out some dried beef and hardtack, then a spare bedroll. Tell you what, though, you said you have a job waiting in Sloan. What kind of work? Teaching, Willa said, accepting the food gratefully. The town is growing with the mining operations, and they need someone to teach the children. My father was a school teacher before he... She trailed off, not wanting to explain about his death and the debts he had left behind. Quinn nodded, not pressing for details. Honest work? Town will be lucky to have you. He began checking his horse's tack, giving her a moment of privacy to eat. I figure we can ride double on my horse for now. She is strong enough to carry us both for a while, at least until we can pick up the trail of those thieves. With luck, we will find your mare and supplies before they sell them off. You would do that? Willa asked, hope flickering in her chest. Go after them, I mean. Was already planning on it, Quinn said with a slight smile that softened his rugged features. Like I said, been trailing them for days. They hit a ranch where I was working last month, took 6 horses, including my favorite gelding. This is personal now. Over the next hour, as the sun climbed higher and the desert heat began to shimmer off the rocks, Quinn helped Willa break down what little remained of her camp and prepared for the journey. He moved with quiet efficiency, and she found herself watching the way his hands worked, competent and sure. There was something reassuring about his presence, something that made her feel safer than she had in days. When they were ready to leave, Quinn mounted his buckskin mare first, then offered his hand to help Willa up behind him. She hesitated for just a moment, suddenly aware of how intimate it would be to ride pressed against a stranger's back. But survival trumped propriety, and she grasped his hand. His grip was strong and steady as he pulled her up effortlessly. She settled behind the saddle, acutely aware of his warmth and the solid strength of his back. Hold on, Quinn said simply, and Willa wrapped her arms around his waist, trying not to think about how her heart was beating faster. They rode out of her camp following the tracks left by the thieves. Quinn proved to be an excellent tracker, reading signs in the dirt and rocks that Willa would never have noticed. He pointed out broken branches, disturbed stones, and the telltale marks of horseshoes. As the morning wore on and they rode deeper into the Nevada wilderness, he began to talk, sharing stories about his life in a way that felt natural and easy. Grew up on a ranch in Wyoming, Quinn said, as they followed a rocky trail between 2 hills. My father raised cattle, and I learned to ride before I could walk, or so my mama always claimed. Lost them both to fever when I was 19, sold the ranch to pay the debts, and have been drifting ever since. Working ranches, driving cattle, taking whatever honest work I could find. That must have been hard, Willa said softly, her cheek nearly resting against his shoulder blade as the horse picked its way carefully down a slope. Losing your home like that? It was, Quinn admitted, but I learned that home is not always a place. Sometimes it is just wherever you feel like you belong. He paused, then added, What about you, Miss Lawson? What made you decide to head out to Sloan on your own? Willa found herself telling him about her father, about how he had been a wonderful teacher, but a terrible gambler, how his debts had piled up after her mother died, giving birth to a stillborn son 10 years ago. How Willa had tried to hold things together, but after her father passed 6 months ago, the creditors had taken everything. The teaching position in Sloan had been her lifeline, a chance to start over where nobody knew about her family's shame. "Sounds like you have had your share of hard times," Quinn said, and she could hear the sympathy in his voice. "Takes courage to start over like that." "Or desperation," Willa said with a bitter laugh. "Courage," Quinn repeated firmly. "Desperation makes people give up. You did not give up." Something about the simple confidence in his words made tears prick at Willa's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, grateful he could not see her face. They rode in companionable silence for a while after that, the desert landscape rolling past in shades of brown, red, and dusty green. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Willa was grateful for the periodic sips of water Quinn offered from his canteen. He seemed to know instinctively when to rest the horse, when to push on, and when to dismount and walk to give the animal a break. Around midday they stopped in the meager shade of a rocky outcropping. Quinn spread out his bedroll for Willa to sit on while he tended to his horse, giving the mare water from his hat and checking her hooves. Willa watched him work, noting the gentle way he spoke to the animal, the care he took. It said a lot about a man, how he treated his horse. "We are making good time," Quinn said, coming to sit near her with more dried beef and hardtack. "Tracks are still fresh, maybe half a day ahead of us now. They are not expecting anyone to follow this far." "What will happen when we catch up to them?" Willa asked, accepting the food. "There are 4 of them and only 1 of you." "2 of us," Quinn corrected with a slight grin. "Can you shoot?" "My father taught me," Willa said, "but I'm not carrying a gun." Quinn reached behind him and pulled a small revolver from his belt. "Spare piece, grrr," he said, offering it to her handle first. "Hope we will not need it, but better to have it. My plan is not to fight them if we can avoid it. I am hoping to catch them at their camp tonight when they are settled in. Maybe we can get your horse and supplies back without any gunplay." Willa took the revolver, feeling the weight of it in her hand. It had been years since she had held a gun, but the familiar heft brought back memories of her father teaching her to shoot tin cans off fence posts. "I hope you're right about avoiding a fight." "Me too," Quinn said seriously. "But Miss Lawson, I want you to know that if things go wrong, I will make sure you get to safety first. That is not negotiable." Willa met his eyes, those clear blue eyes that seemed to see right through her careful defenses. "Why are you doing this, really? You could have just given me some water and directions and ridden on. Nobody would have blamed you." Quinn was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting out over the desert landscape. "A few years back, I was in a bad spot. Got jumped by claim jumpers up in Montana, beat up pretty badly and left for dead. A stranger found me, shared his supplies, got me to a doctor. Never even told me his name. Just said that was what decent people did for each other. I figure I owe it to his memory to do the same." "That is a good reason," Willa said softly. "Also," Quinn added, and now he looked back at her with something warmer in his expression, "I could not leave you there. Soon as I saw you standing in that camp looking so fierce and scared at the same time, I knew I had to help. Some things you just know in your gut are the right thing to do." Willa felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the desert sun. She looked down at the revolver in her hand, suddenly flustered. "Well, I am very grateful, Mr. Prescott." "Quinn," he said, "if we are going to be traveling together, might as well use first names. And I'm grateful for the company, Willa. Gets lonely on the trail sometimes, and you are easy to talk to." They rested a while longer, then mounted up again and continued following the thieves' trail. The afternoon passed in a blur of heat and dust and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Willa found herself relaxing against Quinn's back, her arms around his waist feeling less awkward and more natural as the hours went by. They talked more, sharing stories and opinions, finding surprising common ground despite their different backgrounds. Quinn told her about the wild horses he had seen in Wyoming, about cattle drives and stampedes and sleeping under the stars. Willa told him about her favorite books, about teaching children to read, and seeing their faces light up with understanding. They discovered they both loved thunderstorms, both hated coffee that was too weak, and both had a secret fondness for peppermint candy. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold, Quinn slowed the horse and pointed ahead. "See that smoke? That is a campfire, probably 2 or 3 miles off. I am willing to bet that is our thieves." Willa squinted into the distance and could just barely make out a thin column of smoke rising into the evening sky. Her heart began to pound. "What do we do?" "We wait for full dark," Quinn said, guiding his horse off the trail and into a small canyon that would hide them from view. "Let them settle in, maybe drink a little, if they have whiskey. Then we move in quietly and see what we are dealing with." They made a cold camp, not daring to light a fire that might give away their position. Quinn shared more of his supplies, and they ate while watching the sun set in spectacular fashion, the whole sky turning purple and pink and gold. In the growing darkness, Willa found herself sitting close to Quinn, sharing his bedroll for warmth as the desert temperature dropped rapidly. "Nervous?" Quinn asked quietly, his shoulder touching hers. "Terrified," Willa admitted, "but also angry. Those men took everything I had, everything I needed to start my new life. I want it back." "We will get it back," Quinn promised, "one way or another." They waited until the stars came out in force, the Milky Way spreading across the sky like a river of light. Willa had never seen so many stars, and under different circumstances she would have found it beautiful. As it was, her stomach was tied in knots with anxiety. Finally, Quinn stood and began checking his guns. He had a rifle in his saddle scabbard and a revolver on his hip, and he moved with the practiced ease of someone who knew his weapons well. "Stay close to me," he said. "If I tell you to run, you run, and do not look back. Understood?" "Understood," Willa said, though she had no intention of abandoning him if things went wrong. They approached the thieves' camp on foot, leaving Quinn's horse hidden in the canyon. Quinn moved like a shadow, barely making a sound, and Willa did her best to follow his example. As they drew closer, they could hear voices and see the flicker of firelight. Quinn motioned for Willa to crouch behind a large boulder, and they peered around it to assess the situation. 4 men sat around a fire, passing a bottle between them. Willa immediately spotted her mare tied to a line with 3 other horses, and her saddlebags were piled near the fire. Relief flooded through her at seeing her belongings intact, but it was quickly replaced by fresh anger at the casual way these men were celebrating their theft. Quinn leaned close to whisper in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "I recognize 2 of them from the ranch. The big one with the beard is their leader, calls himself Dutch, mean as a snake. See how the horses are tied? If we can spook them, they might bolt and scatter the thieves. Then we grab your mare and get out of here." "How do we spook them?" Willa whispered back. Quinn thought for a moment, then pulled out a match. "Dried brush and a good shout might do it, but we have to time it right and we have to be ready to move fast." They crept around the perimeter of the camp, moving painfully slowly to avoid making noise. Quinn positioned Willa near where the horses were tied, then moved off to the opposite side where thick brush grew close to the camp. Willa's heart hammered so hard she was sure the thieves would hear it, but they were too busy drinking and laughing about their latest haul. Suddenly, flames erupted in the brush near the camp, and Quinn let out a wild yell that echoed off the rocks. The thieves jumped to their feet in confusion, and the horses whinnied and reared in panic. The fire spread quickly through the dry brush, and the thieves were shouting and scrambling to grab their gear. Willa did not waste a second. She ran to her mare, pulling out the knife Quinn had given her and sawing through the rope that held her. The mare recognized her immediately and pressed her nose against Willa's shoulder. "Come on, girl," Willa murmured, grabbing the lead rope and turning to run, but one of the thieves had spotted her. "Hey, someone is taking the horses," he shouted, and suddenly everything went wrong. Gunfire erupted, and Willa heard Quinn return fire from somewhere in the darkness. She threw herself onto her mare's back, not bothering with a saddle, and kicked the horse into a gallop. More shots rang out, and she heard someone cursing. Her mare surged forward, racing away from the chaos, and Willa clung to the animal's mane with desperate strength. She had gone maybe a quarter mile when she heard hoofbeats behind her and nearly screamed until she recognized Quinn's voice calling her name. She reined in her mare and saw him galloping toward her on his buckskin, her saddlebag slung across his saddle horn. "You got them!" Willa gasped. "Had to leave the rest," Quinn said breathlessly. "But I got your bags. Are you hurt?" "No, I am fine. You?" "Just fine. But we need to put some distance between us and them before they get organized. Come on." They rode hard through the night, putting miles between themselves and the thieves' camp. The moon had risen, providing enough light to navigate by, and both horses seemed to sense the urgency. Finally, well past midnight, Quinn led them into a narrow canyon with high walls that would be easy to defend if necessary. "We will rest here for a few hours, Deshprar," he said, dismounting stiffly. "I will take first watch." But Willa was too full of adrenaline to sleep. She checked through her saddlebags and was relieved to find that most of her belongings were still intact. Her money was there, her spare clothes, her father's pocket watch that was one of the few things the creditors had not taken. She clutched the watch to her chest, feeling tears of relief stream down her face. Quinn appeared at her side, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Hey, it is all right. You're safe now." "I know," Willa said, wiping at her eyes with her sleeve. "I am just so relieved and so grateful to you. Quinn, you could have been killed back there." "But I was not," Quinn said softly. He sat down beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. "And neither were you. That is what matters." Willa turned to look at him, this man who had appeared in her life like Providence itself. In the moonlight, his face was all angles and shadows, but his eyes were warm. "I do not know how to thank you properly." "You already thanked me," Quinn said. "Besides, I told you no repayment needed." "Still," Willa insisted. She reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. "You are a good man, Quinn Prescott. Better than most I've known." Quinn's hand turned under hers, his fingers curling around her palm. "You make me want to be better still," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made Willa's breath catch. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, looking into each other's eyes. Willa felt something shift between them, something that had been building since the moment they met that morning. It seemed impossible that they had only known each other for one day. It felt like much longer, like she had known him for years. "Willa," Quinn began, then hesitated. "I know this is fast, and maybe I have no right to say this, but I have not been able to stop thinking about you all day. The way you did not fall apart when you lost everything, the way you were brave enough to go after those thieves, the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I do not believe in love at first sight, but I am starting to think I might believe in something close to it." Willa's heart felt like it might burst. "I have been thinking the same thing," she whispered. "This morning when you rode into my camp, I thought you were just going to be my salvation from dying in the desert. But you are more than that. You are kind and brave, and you listen when I talk. Really listen. I have not felt this way about anyone, ever." Quinn lifted his free hand and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I do not want to rush you into anything. I know you have your teaching position waiting and your own life to build, but I would like to be part of it if you will have me." "Yes," Willa said, the word coming out before she could even think. "Yes, I want that." Quinn's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Willa met him halfway. Their lips touched softly, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence and warmth. It was Willa's first real kiss, and it felt like every romantic story she had ever read, but better because it was real, and it was hers. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard and grinning like fools. "Well," Quinn said, his voice rougher than before, and that was worth waiting 25 years for. Willa laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "I think so too." They spent the rest of the night talking quietly, sometimes kissing, sometimes just sitting close together under the stars. Quinn did keep watch, his rifle across his lap, but the thieves never appeared. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, they mounted their horses and continued toward Sloane, riding side by side now that Willa had her mare back. The journey took another day and a half, and they used every moment to learn more about each other. Quinn told her about his dreams of having his own ranch someday, a place where he could raise horses and cattle and put down roots. Willa told him about her hopes for her students in Sloane, about wanting to make a real difference in children's lives the way her father had. They discovered that they balanced each other well. Where Quinn was cautious, Willa was bold. Where Willa was idealistic, Quinn was practical. They challenged each other but also supported each other. And with every mile they traveled, Willa became more certain that this unexpected meeting had been fate. When they finally rode into Sloane late on a dusty afternoon, Willa felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The town was larger than she had expected, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church with a white steeple, and the constant sound of mining operations echoing from the hills beyond. People bustled about their business, and Willa saw several children playing in the street. Quinn helped her dismount outside a building with a sign that read Sloane Town Hall and School. "I will wait here with the horses," he said. "You go talk to whoever you need to talk to about your position." Willa nodded, but she grabbed his hand first. "You will wait. You will not leave." "Not going anywhere," Quinn promised. "We are in this together now, remember?" Inside the town hall, Willa met with Mayor Harrison, a portly man with kind eyes who seemed relieved that she had finally arrived. "We had almost given up on you, Miss Lawson. Your telegram said you would be here 4 days ago." Willa explained about the thieves, though she left out some of the more dangerous details. The mayor was appropriately horrified and insisted on showing her to the small house that came with her teaching position, a neat 2-room cabin on the edge of town with a little garden plot. "The school is just down the road," Mayor Harrison said. "Classes start next Monday, which gives you a few days to settle in and prepare. We have 18 students ranging from age 6 to 14, and they are eager to meet their new teacher." After the mayor left, Willa returned to where Quinn was waiting, and together they walked their horses to her new home. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, with a pot-bellied stove, a narrow bed, a table and 2 chairs, and shelves for books and supplies. It was not much, but it was hers, and Willa felt a surge of pride. "It is perfect," she said, looking around with shining eyes. Quinn stood in the doorway, hat in his hands. "It is a good place," he agreed. "You will be happy here, I think." Willa turned to face him, suddenly afraid that this was where they would part ways. "Quinn, what will you do now? You said you had a ranching job waiting?" "At the Peterson Ranch, about 5 miles outside of town," Quinn confirmed. "I should probably ride out there today, let them know I arrived." He hesitated, then added, "But I will be back. Tomorrow, if you will see me, and the day after that, every day that you will have me, Willa, I will be here." Relief and joy flooded through her. "I will see you every day," she promised. "I want that very much." Quinn stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Willa rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. "This is just the beginning for us," he murmured into her hair. "I feel it." "Me too," Willa whispered. They stood like that for a long moment, reluctant to part. Finally, Quinn pulled back just enough to tip her chin up and kiss her again, slow and sweet and full of promise. When he left to ride out to the Peterson Ranch, Willa stood on her porch and watched until he was out of sight, already counting the hours until she would see him again. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity and happiness. Willa threw herself into preparing for her students, organizing the 1-room schoolhouse and planning lessons. True to his word, Quinn came to see her every evening after his work at the ranch was done. Sometimes they would walk through town together, sometimes they would sit on her porch and talk until the stars came out, and sometimes Quinn would help her prepare the schoolroom, building new shelves and repairing broken desks. The townspeople quickly accepted them as a couple, and Willa was grateful for the warm welcome she received. The other women in town brought her canned goods and fresh bread, offering advice about teaching their children. The men tipped their hats respectfully when they passed, and several told Quinn he was a lucky man. When school started, Willa discovered that she loved teaching even more than she had expected. Her students were eager and bright, and she found creative ways to make lessons engaging even with limited supplies. Quinn would sometimes arrive early to pick her up, and the children would cluster around him begging for stories about horses and cattle drives. He was a natural with them, patient and kind, and Willa's heart would swell watching him interact with her students. 2 months after she arrived in Sloan, on a cool October evening, Quinn asked her to take a ride with him. They rode out to a beautiful spot in the hills where a natural spring created a small oasis of green in the desert landscape. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and red. Quinn helped Willa dismount, then held both her hands in his. "Willa, I have been thinking about this for weeks now, trying to find the right words, but the truth is there are no perfect words for what I feel. From the moment I saw you in that camp, something in my chest just knew. You are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever met. You challenge me to be better, and you make me laugh, and every day with you feels like a gift." Willa's eyes filled with tears as Quinn dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "I do not have much to offer you yet, just a job at a ranch and a heart that is completely yours, but I am working on buying land, on building something permanent. And I want to build it with you, Willa Lawson. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Willa said, the word coming out as half laugh, half sob. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Quinn stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as they both laughed with pure joy. He slid the ring onto her finger, and Willa admired how it caught the fading sunlight. "It was my mother's," Quinn said softly. "The only thing I kept from the ranch. I have been carrying it with me for years, waiting for the right woman to give it to." "It is perfect," Willa said, then pulled him down for a kiss that was full of love and promise, and the future they would build together. They were married 3 weeks later in the white church at the center of Sloan, with the whole town in attendance. Mayor Harrison gave Willa away, and several of her students served as flower girl and ring bearer. Willa wore a simple blue dress that the women of the town had helped her sew, and Quinn wore his best suit, looking impossibly handsome with his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever hardships might come, Willa thought about that morning when she had woken to find everything stolen. How desperate and lost she had felt. How impossible it had seemed that anything good could come from such a terrible situation. But here she was, marrying the man she loved, surrounded by a community that had welcomed her, with a career she was passionate about, and a future full of hope. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the town hall with music and dancing and more food than Willa had seen in months. Quinn never left her side, his hand constantly seeking hers, his eyes full of love every time he looked at her. They danced until Willa's feet hurt, and when Quinn finally swept her up in his arms to carry her to their home, the whole town cheered. Quinn had been working on expanding Willa's cabin, adding a bedroom and a larger living space. It was not finished yet, but he had made sure their bedroom was complete with a real bed frame he had built himself and a colorful quilt that his boss's wife had given them as a wedding gift. He carried Willa over the threshold, both of them grinning, and gently set her down. "Welcome home, Mrs. Prescott," he said softly. "I like the sound of that," Willa replied, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Though the students will still call me Miss Lawson at school, the mayor thought it would be less confusing." You can be whoever you need to be during the day, Quinn said, pulling her close, as long as you are mine at night. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of gentle discoveries and whispered endearments. Quinn was patient and loving, making sure Willa felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking quietly about their dreams for the future. I put a down payment on that land I told you about, Quinn said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. 160 acres about 3 miles from here, with good water and grassland. I have been saving every penny from my wages, and with what you are earning from teaching, we should be able to build a house and start a small herd within a year. Our own ranch, Willa said wonderingly. I still cannot quite believe it is real. It is real, Quinn promised, and we are going to build something wonderful together, a place where we can raise a family, where we can put down roots and never have to leave. A family, Willa repeated, smiling in the darkness. I want that. Children of our own to love and teach. Me too, Quinn said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Though I hope they have your brains and your courage. And your kindness and your strength, Willa countered. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, warm and safe, and happier than either of them had ever imagined possible. The first year of their marriage was busy and challenging, but full of joy. Willa continued teaching, and her school became known as one of the best in the region. Parents from neighboring settlements began sending their children to board in Sloan just so they could attend her classes. Quinn worked hard at the Peterson Ranch while also beginning to build their house on their own land. Every spare moment was spent working on their dream. By their first anniversary, they had a small but sturdy house with 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Quinn had built most of it himself, with help from friends he had made in town. They moved in during the spring, and Willa planted a garden that flourished in the desert soil once she learned the tricks of irrigation. Quinn had also purchased their first cattle, 10 head to start with, and he was training a young horse he had bought from a traveling trader. The horse, a spirited bay gelding, was mean and wild when Quinn got him, but with patience and gentle handling, he was becoming a fine working horse. Willa loved watching Quinn work with animals, seeing the intuitive understanding he had for their needs and fears. That summer, Willa discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when the doctor in Sloan confirmed it, she could barely contain her joy. She waited until that evening when Quinn came in from working with the cattle, dusty and tired, but smiling as always when he saw her. I have news, Willa said, unable to keep the grin off her face. Quinn immediately looked concerned. What kind of news? Is everything all right? Everything is wonderful, Willa assured him. She took his hands and placed them on her still flat stomach. We are going to have a baby, Quinn. Sometime in January, the doctor thinks. Quinn's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, wonder, and finally pure elation. He let out a whoop of joy and picked Willa up, spinning her carefully. A baby! We are going to have a baby! He set her down gently, immediately worried. Should I have done that? Did I hurt you? Willa laughed at his sudden concern. I am pregnant. Not made of glass, but yes, you should probably be a little careful with the spinning. Quinn dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against her stomach as if he could hear the tiny life growing inside. Hello in there, he said softly. This is your papa. I just want you to know that you are already so loved, and I cannot wait to meet you. Tears streamed down Willa's face as she ran her fingers through Quinn's hair. You are going to be an amazing father. I am going to try, Quinn said, standing up and wrapping his arms around her. God, Willa, I am so happy I could burst. You have given me everything I never knew I needed. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Willa had to reduce her teaching hours during the last few months. The town rallied around them, with women bringing baby clothes they had sewn and offering advice. Quinn became almost comically overprotective, insisting on doing all the heavy chores and worrying every time Willa so much as sneezed. Their son was born on a cold January night in 1886, during a snowstorm that was rare for Nevada. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Quinn, pacing in the other room, while the midwife and doctor tended to Willa, thought he might lose his mind with worry. But finally, just before dawn, he heard the piercing cry of a newborn baby, and the midwife called him in. Willa lay exhausted in their bed, her hair damp with sweat, but her face glowing with joy. In her arms was a tiny red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. "Quinn, come meet your son," she said tiredly. Quinn approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. When he finally looked down at the baby, he felt something in his chest crack wide open. "He is perfect," Quinn whispered. "Willa, he is absolutely perfect." "Want to hold him?" Willa asked. With shaking hands, Quinn took his son, cradling the infant against his chest. The baby opened dark blue eyes and seemed to look right at him, and Quinn felt tears stream down his face. "Hello, little man," he said softly. "I am your papa, and I promise I'm going to do everything I can to give you a good life." They named him Thomas Henry Prescott after both their fathers, but from the start they called him Tommy. He was a healthy, happy baby with a strong set of lungs and an appetite to match. Quinn proved to be a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings despite his long days working the ranch. He would walk Tommy around their house for hours when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice until Tommy fell asleep against his shoulder. Willa returned to teaching part-time when Tommy was 3 months old, and they worked out a system where Quinn would bring the baby to the schoolhouse during his lunch break so Willa could nurse him. The students loved having a baby around, and Tommy became something of a school mascot. Their ranch continued to grow slowly but steadily. Quinn's reputation as an honest, hard-working man spread, and people began bringing him horses to train. He had a gift for it, a patience and understanding that could gentle even the wildest animal. The income from training, combined with their cattle sales and Willa's teaching salary, meant they were actually beginning to prosper. When Tommy was 2 years old, Willa became pregnant again. This time she recognized the signs immediately, and she was both excited and nervous. Tommy had been such a good baby that she worried lightning could not strike twice. But when their daughter was born in the summer of 1888, she proved to be just as sweet-natured as her brother. They named her Rose Elizabeth, and she looked exactly like Willa, with the same dark hair and delicate features. Quinn was completely smitten, and Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her. The house was full of noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. As the years passed, their ranch grew into one of the most successful in the area. Quinn had a real talent for breeding horses, and ranchers came from hundreds of miles away to buy his stock. Willa eventually had to give up teaching full-time to help manage the ranch and raise their growing family. A third child, another boy they named Daniel, arrived in 1890, followed by a surprise pregnancy in 1893 that gave them twin girls, Clara and Catherine. With 5 children, the house they had built seemed to shrink, so Quinn expanded it again, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. They hired help for the ranch, taking on 2 young cowboys who lived in a bunkhouse Quinn built near the barn. The ranch, which they had named the Double P for Prescott, became known throughout Nevada for quality horses and good beef cattle. Through it all, Quinn and Willa's love for each other never dimmed. If anything, it grew deeper and more complex, weathering the challenges of raising children and running a business. They still made time for each other, still sat on their porch in the evenings after the children were in bed, talking and holding hands, and remembering that long-ago day when a theft had brought them together. "Do you ever think about those thieves?" Willa asked one evening when they were both in their 30s, watching the sun set over their land. Quinn considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I heard Dutch got caught a few years later, ended up in prison. Do not know what happened to the others. Why do you ask?" "Because as terrible as it was at the time, losing my supplies led me to you," Willa said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "If those men had not stolen from me, if you had not come along and shared what you had, none of this would exist. Our children, our ranch, this life we built together. It all came from that one moment. Quinn pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I have thought about that too, how something so bad turned into something so good. Makes me believe in providence, I guess. That things happen for a reason, even when we cannot see it at the time. I believe that too, Willa said. And I believe that I was always meant to find you one way or another. Always meant to find each other, Quinn corrected. This is not just your story or my story, Willa. It is our story. And it is still being written. Their children grew up strong and healthy, educated by their mother's love of learning and their father's practical wisdom. Tommy developed his father's way with horses and took over most of the training by the time he was 18. Rose proved to be a gifted artist, painting scenes of ranch life that people began to commission. Daniel was quieter than his siblings, but had a head for business that would eventually help expand the ranch even further. The twins, Clara and Catherine, were inseparable and full of mischief, keeping their parents on their toes well into their teenage years. When Tommy was 21, he married a girl from Sloan named Sarah, and they built a house on the far end of the ranch property. Tommy and Sarah gave Quinn and Willa their first grandchild, a boy they named Quinn Jr., when Quinn was 47. Holding his grandson for the first time, Quinn thought about his own father, about the legacy of love and hard work that had been passed down. He was determined to pass that same legacy to his grandson and all the grandchildren who would follow. Rose married a doctor who had moved to Sloan and set up practice. They lived in town, and Rose continued her painting while raising 3 daughters. Daniel eventually married as well, taking a wife from California who brought new ideas about ranch management that helped the Double P thrive even as the West became more settled and civilized. The twins proved harder to marry off, not because they lacked suitors, but because they were fiercely independent and refused to settle for anything less than true love. Clara finally married at 26, choosing a lawyer from Carson City who shared her passion for education reform. Catherine held out until 28, when she met a traveling photographer and fell head over heels. They moved to San Francisco, but she visited the ranch often, always bringing photographs of her adventures in the big city. Through all the weddings and births and the inevitable losses that came with age, Quinn and Willa remained the center of their family. Their love story became something of a legend in Sloan, told and retold by people who remembered the young teacher who had lost everything and the cowboy who had shared what little he had. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1914, their children and grandchildren organized a huge celebration at the ranch. Nearly 100 people came, including many of Willa's former students who were now adults with children of their own. There was music and dancing and more food than could possibly be eaten. And as the sun began to set, Quinn stood up to make a toast. 30 years ago, I was a drifter with no real home and no particular future, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. He was 50 now, his sandy hair gone mostly gray, but his blue eyes were as sharp and clear as ever. Then I met a woman sitting by a dead fire, robbed of everything she owned, and somehow she made me want to be more than I was. Willa, you have given me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. Every good thing I have comes from you. Willa stood beside him, her dark hair now streaked with silver, laugh lines crinkling around her eyes. You are giving me too much credit, she said, taking his hand. We built this together, Quinn. We took nothing and made it into something beautiful, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. They kissed, while their children and grandchildren applauded and whistled, and for a moment they were 22 and 25 again, meeting for the first time on a dusty Nevada trail. As they grew older, Quinn and Willa gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to their children. Tommy became the primary manager, with Daniel handling the business side and Rose's husband providing medical care for both the family and the ranch hands. Quinn still trained a few special horses, unwilling to give up the work he loved, and Willa occasionally taught reading to her grandchildren, passing on her passion for education. They spent more time together, taking rides out to the spot where Quinn had proposed, sitting on their porch and watching storms roll in, traveling to visit their children who had moved away. They were grandparents now, and eventually great-grandparents. the patriarchs of a sprawling family tree that owed its existence to one act of kindness on a desert trail. When Quinn was 72 years old, he was thrown from a horse he was training. It was a freak accident, the kind of thing that should not have happened to someone with his experience, but the horse spooked at a snake and Quinn landed badly. He broke his hip and several ribs, and while he survived the initial injuries, complications set in. Within a week, it was clear he was not going to recover. Willa never left his side during those final days. She sat by his bed in the house they had built together, holding his hand and talking softly about their life, their children, their adventures. All 5 of their children came home, filling the house with the sound and activity that had always marked the Prescott family. On a clear spring morning with sunshine streaming through the bedroom window and Willa's hand in his, Quinn took his last breath. His final words were, "I would do it all again, every hard moment, just to have this life with you." Willa lived for another 8 years after Quinn's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She never remarried, saying that she had already had the great love of her life and needed no other. She continued to paint, to read, to involve herself in her family's lives. But everyone could see that a part of her was missing, that she was waiting for the day when she could be reunited with her cowboy. When Willa died peacefully in her sleep at age 81, her children found a letter she had written to be read after her death. In it, she told the story of that fateful day when she had lost everything, and how a stranger with kind eyes had shared his supplies and changed the course of her life. She wrote about the love that had sustained her through decades of joy and hardship, about the family they had built from nothing, about the legacy of kindness and generosity that she hoped would continue through the generations. When you find yourself in a position to help someone, she had written, remember that you might be changing not just their life, but the lives of all the people who come after. Quinn shared his supplies with me because it was the right thing to do, never expecting anything in return. And from that one good deed came all of this: 5 children, 23 grandchildren, and 41 great-grandchildren at last count, all carrying forward the values of kindness, hard work, and love that Quinn embodied. If you learn nothing else from our story, learn this: the smallest act of compassion can change the world. They buried Willa next to Quinn on a hill overlooking the ranch under the shade of a cottonwood tree they had planted together on their 5th anniversary. Their graves were marked with simple headstones that bore their names, the dates of their births and deaths, and a single line that captured the essence of their story: 2 hearts, 1 journey, forever together. The Double P Ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, becoming one of the longest-running family ranches in Nevada. The story of how it all began, with a theft and a cowboy's generosity, was told to every new generation, a reminder of where they came from and the values they were meant to uphold. In the town of Sloan, the schoolhouse where Willa had taught for so many years was eventually renamed the Lawson Prescott School in honor of her contributions to education in the region. A plaque was placed outside telling the story of the determined young teacher who had come to Nevada with nothing and built a legacy that would last for generations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the desert wind blew across the ranch, old-timers in Sloan would gather and tell stories about Quinn and Willa Prescott. They talked about the love that had sparked on a dusty trail, about how 2 people who should have been just passing strangers instead became partners for life. They talked about the family that grew from that chance meeting, about the ranch that still stood as a testament to what could be built with hard work and love. The story of Quinn and Willa became more than just a tale of romance. It became a parable about the power of kindness, about how helping a stranger in need could ripple out into the world in ways impossible to predict. It became a reminder that even in the hardest times, in the most desperate circumstances, there was always the possibility of redemption, of hope, of love finding a way. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually scatter across the country, pursuing diverse careers and dreams. But they all carried with them the story of their ancestors, of the cowboy who shared his supplies and the teacher who had the courage to accept help and build something beautiful from it. And whenever they faced their own challenges, their own moments of desperation or loss, they would remember that story and find strength in it. The Double P Ranch still operates today, now in its sixth generation of Prescott family management. The original house that Quinn built has been preserved and turned into a small museum documenting the family's history. Visitors can see the simple gold ring that Quinn gave to Willa, now displayed in a glass case, along with the pocket watch that belonged to Willa's father and other artifacts from their lives. But the most popular exhibit is a simple display case containing a worn leather canteen, the very one that Quinn had handed to Willa on that fateful morning in 1884 when he found her stranded by her dead campfire. Next to it is a placard that tells their story in Willa's own words, transcribed from a journal she kept throughout her life. "I had lost everything," the placard reads, "and then a stranger appeared and shared what little he had. That was the moment my real life began. Everything that came after, all the joy and love and family, started with that one act of kindness. Quinn gave me water when I was thirsty, food when I was hungry, and hope when I had none. But more than that, he gave me himself, and that was the greatest gift of all. Our story proves that the worst moments of our lives can become the doorways to the best moments if we have the courage to walk through them and the wisdom to accept help when it is offered. I will love him forever, in this life and the next." And so the story endures, passed down through the generations, a reminder that in the wild and often harsh landscape of the Old West, the most valuable thing a person could possess was not gold or land or cattle, but the capacity for love and kindness. Quinn Prescott and Willa Lawson proved that truth through the life they built together, and their legacy continues to inspire everyone who hears their story. On warm summer evenings, when the sun sets over the Nevada desert in shades of gold and crimson, you can still visit the hill where Quinn and Willa rest side by side. The cottonwood tree has grown tall and strong, its leaves whispering in the wind like soft voices telling old stories. And if you stand there quietly looking out over the ranch that grew from nothing into something magnificent, you can almost see them. A young cowboy and a young teacher riding together across the open land, their whole future stretching before them like an undiscovered country full of promise and possibility and love. Their story began with loss and theft, with a campfire gone cold and supplies stolen in the night, but it ended with abundance, with family and legacy and love that transcended death itself. It was a story of the West, of hard times and harder choices, of survival and perseverance. But more than that, it was a love story, pure and simple, about two people who found each other when they needed it most, and chose to walk through life together, hand in hand, heart to heart, for better or worse, until death parted them and even beyond. And that is why the story of Quinn and Willa Prescott will be told as long as there are people to tell it, a testament to the enduring power of love and the simple, profound truth that sharing what we have with others can change not just their lives, but our own, in ways we never dreamed possible.